Picture this. You're scrolling through your day, thinking you know how the world works. Good guys wear suits, bad guys wear leather. Success comes to those who play by the rules, and trouble follows those who don't. But what if I told you about a moment that shattered every assumption you ever had about judgment, brotherhood, and the power of simple human kindness? What if I told you about Marcus Johnson, a quiet black mechanic in a small Alabama town, whose life changed forever the day a roaring Harley pulled into his garage? What if that bike belonged to someone the whole town feared? What if one act of professional pride cost him everything he thought he had, but gave him something he never knew he needed? This isn't just another feel-good story. This is about what happens when two worlds collide, when prejudice meets purpose, and when doing the right thing leads to consequences nobody saw coming. It's about discovering that sometimes the people society tells us to fear are the ones who end up saving us. Are you ready to have everything you think you know turned upside down? Because Marcus Johnson's story will do exactly that, and by the end, you'll never look at a leather jacket the same way again. Buckle up. This ride is about to begin. Marcus Johnson wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a small streak of motor oil across his dark skin. The late afternoon sun streamed through the dusty windows of Johnson Auto Repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor scattered with tools and car parts. At 28 years old, Marcus had been running the small garage in Millfield, Alabama for 3 years, ever since his father had passed away and left him the business. The garage wasn't much to look at from the outside. The paint was peeling on the wooden sign that read Johnson Auto Repair, honest work, fair prices, and the building itself was a converted gas station from the 1960s. But Marcus took pride in his work. He had a reputation in Millfield for being able to fix anything with an engine, and, more importantly, for being honest about the cost and time it would take. Millfield was the kind of small southern town where everyone knew everyone else's business. With a population of just under 8,000, it was the kind of place where people still waved at each other on the street, and where the biggest excitement usually came from high school football games on Friday nights. Marcus had grown up here, gone to the local high school, and had planned to leave for college in Atlanta before his father's unexpected heart attack changed everything. Now, 3 years later, he had settled into a routine. He opened the garage at 7 each morning, worked on whatever cars came in, and closed around 6 in the evening. His customers were mostly locals, farmers with pickup trucks, elderly ladies with old sedans, and young families with minivans that needed constant attention. Marcus treated everyone with the same respect and professionalism, regardless of who they were or how much money they had. The town had its share of challenges. There were still some people who remembered the old days, who weren't entirely comfortable with a young black man running his own business in the center of town. But Marcus had earned respect through his work and his character. He never caused trouble, always paid his bills on time, and had even helped out during the tornado that hit the county 2 years ago, working for free to get people's cars running so they could get to work and rebuild their lives. On this particular Tuesday afternoon in September, Marcus was underneath a 2003 Honda Civic, replacing the brake pads for Mrs. Patterson, the retired school teacher who lived on Elm Street. She had taught Marcus in 3rd grade and still called him that sweet Johnson boy whenever she saw him around town. The work was routine. He had done this same job hundreds of times before. But Marcus approached every task with the same careful attention to detail that his father had taught him. As he tightened the last bolt on the brake caliper, Marcus heard the distinctive rumble of a motorcycle engine outside. The sound was different from the usual traffic that passed by his garage. This was deeper, more powerful, with the kind of rumble that came from a big V-twin engine with aftermarket exhaust pipes. He had heard engines like this before, but they rarely stopped at his shop. Marcus rolled out from under the Honda and stood up, wiping his hands on his coveralls. Through the open bay door, he could see a massive black Harley-Davidson motorcycle pulling into his parking lot. The bike was beautiful, a road king with chrome everywhere, custom paint, and leather saddlebags. But what caught Marcus's attention wasn't the motorcycle itself. It was the rider. The man climbing off the Harley was enormous. He stood at least 6 feet 4 inches tall and looked like he weighed close to 300 pounds, most of it muscle. His arms were covered in tattoos, and he wore the classic uniform of a serious biker, black leather vest, heavy boots, and jeans that had seen a lot of miles. On the back of his vest was a large patch that made Marcus's stomach tighten a little. It was the distinctive winged skull logo of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. Marcus had heard about the Hells Angels, of course. Everyone had. They were one of the most notorious motorcycle clubs in the world, with a reputation that included everything from charity rides to federal investigations. There had been rumors for years that some members lived in the area, but Marcus had never actually seen any of them in Millfield before. The big man took off his helmet, revealing a shaved head and a thick gray beard. His face was weathered and scarred, with the kind of look that suggested he had lived a hard life and wasn't afraid of much. He looked around the garage with sharp blue eyes, taking in the tools, the cars, and, finally, settling his gaze on Marcus. For a moment, neither man said anything. Marcus felt a wave of nervous energy wash over him. He had dealt with all kinds of customers over the years, but never anyone quite like this. He thought about the stories he had heard about biker gangs, about violence and intimidation. But then he remembered his father's words. Treat every customer with respect until they give you a reason not to. The biker walked slowly toward the garage, his heavy boots echoing on the concrete. As he got closer, Marcus could see more details. The man's vest had several other patches, one that said Alabama, and another that simply read Diesel. His arms were covered with intricate tattoos that looked like they had been done by skilled artists over many years. Despite his intimidating appearance, there was something in his eyes that didn't match the tough exterior. Marcus couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it seemed almost respectful. "You the owner?" the man asked. His voice was deep and gravelly, with a slight southern accent. Marcus straightened up and looked the man in the eye. "Yes, sir. Marcus Johnson. What can I do for you?" The biker nodded slightly, as if approving of Marcus's direct response. "Name's Diesel. Got a problem with my bike. Heard you were good with engines." Marcus glanced at the Harley parked outside. "What kind of problem?" "She's running rough. Started about 50 miles back. Engine's cutting out when I give her gas. And there's a weird noise coming from somewhere in the motor. I was heading to Birmingham, but I don't think she'll make it that far." Marcus wiped his hands on a clean rag and walked toward the motorcycle. "Mind if I take a look?" Diesel stepped aside and gestured toward the bike. "Go ahead." As Marcus approached the Harley, he couldn't help but admire the machine. It was clearly well-maintained and expensive. The custom work alone probably cost more than most people made in a year. But as he got closer, he could hear the problem Diesel was talking about. The engine was running, but there was definitely something wrong. It had an irregular idle, and when Diesel revved it, there was a metallic rattling sound that didn't belong. Marcus listened carefully for a few minutes, then looked up at Diesel. "Mind if I shut her down and take a closer look?" "Do what you need to do," Diesel replied. Marcus turned off the engine and began his examination. He checked the obvious things first: the spark plugs, the air filter, the fuel lines. Everything looked good on the surface. But when he removed the primary cover to look at the clutch and transmission, he found the problem. One of the bolts that held the primary chain tensioner had worked loose and was rattling around inside the case. It was a potentially serious problem that could cause major damage if it wasn't fixed soon. "Found it," Marcus said, standing up. "You've got a loose bolt in your primary case. It's not a huge job to fix, but it needs to be done right away. If that bolt gets into the gears, it could destroy your transmission." Diesel looked at the exposed machinery and nodded. "How long will it take?" Marcus thought about it. It was already late in the afternoon, and this wasn't a quick fix. He would need to drain the oil, remove several components, fish out the loose bolt, and then reassemble everything with new gaskets. Couple of hours, maybe 3. But I'm honest with you. I've never worked on a Harley before. I know engines, and I can do the work. But if you'd rather take it to a dealer. Diesel looked surprised. "You're telling me to take my business somewhere else?" Marcus shrugged. "I'm telling you the truth. I can fix it, and I'll do it right. But if you're more comfortable with someone who specializes in Harleys, I understand. There's a dealer about 60 miles north in Huntsville." For the first time since he had arrived, Diesel smiled. It transformed his entire face, making him look less intimidating and more human. "Son, I've been riding bikes for 30 years, and I've dealt with a lot of mechanics. Most of them would have taken my money and pretended they knew exactly what they were doing. I appreciate your honesty. Marcus nodded. So what do you want to do? Fix it. But I've got one condition. What's that? I want to watch you work. Not because I don't trust you, but because I like to see how a man handles himself when he's doing something important. Marcus felt a little nervous about having Diesel watch him work, but he agreed. No problem. Let me finish up with this Honda, and then I'll get started on your bike. As Marcus went back to work on Mrs. Patterson's car, he was aware that Diesel was watching him carefully. But it wasn't the kind of watching that made him feel threatened. It was more like the man was genuinely interested in seeing good work being done. Marcus found himself working with extra care, double-checking everything he did. When he finished with the Honda, Marcus called Mrs. Patterson to let her know her car was ready. She arrived about 20 minutes later, a small, gray-haired woman in her 70s who still moved with the energy of someone much younger. As she walked into the garage, she stopped short when she saw Diesel sitting on a folding chair near the tool bench. Marcus watched the interaction carefully. Mrs. Patterson looked at Diesel for a long moment, taking in his size, his tattoos, and his leather vest. Diesel looked back at her with a neutral expression, neither threatening nor particularly friendly. Marcus held his breath, wondering if there was going to be some kind of problem. Then, Mrs. Patterson smiled and nodded at Diesel. "Good afternoon," she said politely. Diesel stood up from his chair. "Afternoon, ma'am," he replied, his voice respectful. Marcus relaxed a little. Mrs. Patterson paid for her break work, thanked Marcus for his good service as she always did, and drove away in her Honda. After she was gone, Diesel sat back down and looked at Marcus with what might have been approval. "She seemed nice," Diesel said. "Mrs. Patterson's good people. She taught half the kids in this town, including me. Teacher, huh? They deserve respect." Marcus was beginning to realize that there was more to Diesel than his intimidating appearance suggested. As he began working on the Harley, the two men started talking. Diesel told him about his ride from Florida, where he had been visiting friends. Marcus talked about growing up in Millfield and taking over the garage after his father died. The work on the Harley was more complicated than Marcus had initially thought. The loose bolt had caused some damage to the primary chain, and he had to order a new one from the parts store across town. While they waited for the part to arrive, Marcus and Diesel continued their conversation. Marcus learned that Diesel's real name was Frank Morrison, and that he was originally from Birmingham. He had been a member of the Hells Angels for over 20 years, and before that, he had served in the Army during the Gulf War. He talked about his motorcycle with the kind of passion that Marcus recognized. It was the same way Marcus felt about engines and mechanical things. "This bike and me have been through a lot together," Diesel said, running his hand along the chrome gas tank. "Bought her used about 15 years ago and rebuilt her from the ground up. Every bolt, every wire, every piece of chrome. I know where it came from and why it's there." Marcus understood that feeling completely. He felt the same way about his father's old Chevy pickup truck, which sat in the back corner of the garage under a tarp. He had been slowly restoring it for the past 3 years, working on it whenever he had free time. When the new chain arrived, Marcus got back to work. Diesel continued to watch, occasionally asking questions about what Marcus was doing or why he was doing it a certain way. Marcus found himself explaining his thought process, talking through the steps as he worked. It was something he rarely did, but Diesel seemed genuinely interested in understanding the mechanical principles involved. As the sun began to set, Marcus was putting the finishing touches on the repair. He had replaced the damaged chain, installed new gaskets, and refilled the primary case with fresh oil. The work had taken nearly 4 hours, longer than he had estimated, but he had done it right. "Want to fire her up?" Marcus asked. Diesel nodded and climbed onto the bike. He pressed the starter button, and the Harley roared to life. The engine sounded completely different now, smooth and powerful, with none of the rough idle or metallic rattling from before. Diesel revved the engine a few times, listening carefully to the sound. "Perfect," he said, shutting off the engine. "What do I owe you?" Marcus calculated the cost in his head. He had charged his normal labor rate, and added the cost of the new chain and gaskets. The total came to $240, which was fair for the amount of work involved. $240, Marcus said. Diesel reached into his wallet and pulled out $300 bills. Keep the change. You did good work. And you were straight with me from the start. Marcus wanted to protest. $60 was a big tip for a job like this. But something in Diesel's expression told him that the man would be offended if he didn't accept it. Thank you, Marcus said. I appreciate it. Diesel put on his helmet and started the bike again. As he prepared tea, the next morning started like any other for Marcus Johnson. He unlocked the garage at 7 sharp, turned on the lights, and started the coffee pot that sat on a small table in the corner office. The September air was still cool, but Marcus knew it would be another hot day by afternoon. He had 3 cars scheduled for service, a transmission flush for Tom Bradley's pickup truck, an oil change for the Methodist Church's van, and brake work on Sarah Chen's Toyota. Marcus was checking his appointment book when he heard the rumble of diesel engines outside. Through the window, he could see 2 pickup trucks pulling into his parking lot. He recognized them immediately. They belonged to the Hartwell brothers, Jake and Bobby, who owned a small construction company in town. Marcus had done work for them before, mostly maintenance on their work trucks and equipment. But as the Hartwell brothers climbed out of their trucks, Marcus could tell something was different about this visit. Both men looked angry, and they weren't carrying any paperwork or talking about truck problems. Jake Hartwell, the older of the 2 brothers, was a stocky man in his 40s with graying hair and calloused hands. Bobby was younger and taller, with the kind of nervous energy that sometimes led to trouble. Marcus walked outside to meet them, wiping his hands on his coveralls. Morning, Jake, Bobby. What can I do for you? Jake Hartwell looked around the parking lot, then back at Marcus with a hard expression. We heard you had some interesting company here yesterday evening. Marcus felt his stomach tighten slightly. Word traveled fast in Millfield, but he hadn't expected anyone to care about his motorcycle repair. I work on whatever vehicles need fixing. Is there a problem with one of your trucks? Bobby Hartwell stepped closer, his face flushed with anger. The problem is you doing business with Hell's Angels, Marcus. That's not the kind of thing this town needs. I fixed a motorcycle for a customer, Marcus replied calmly. Same as I'd do for anyone else. Jake shook his head. That's not just anyone else. And you know it. Those people are criminals, Marcus. They're drug dealers and killers. And you're helping them out like they're regular folks. Marcus felt his temper rising, but he kept his voice level. The man who came here was polite and paid for his service. I don't know anything about what he does when he's not here, and, frankly, it's not my business. Well, it's our business, Bobby said, stepping even closer. This is our town too, and we don't want that element coming around here, especially not feeling welcome. Everyone's welcome at my shop as long as they behave themselves, Marcus said firmly. My father taught me to judge people by how they treat others, not by what they wear or who they associate with. Jake Hartwell looked frustrated. Your father was a good man, Marcus, but he would have had better sense than this. He would have understood that some lines you don't cross. Marcus felt anger flare up inside him at the mention of his father. Don't tell me what my father would have done. He taught me to treat people fairly and do honest work. That's exactly what I did yesterday. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle, a white sedan with Millfield Police painted on the side. Marcus recognized the car immediately. It belonged to Chief Ray Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's nephew, and one of only 3 full-time police officers in town. Chief Patterson was a reasonable man in his 50s who had taken over the police department 5 years earlier when the previous chief retired. Chief Patterson parked his car and walked over to the group. He was a tall, thin man with thinning brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore his uniform neatly and carried himself with quiet authority. Morning, gentlemen, Chief Patterson said. Everything all right here? Jake Hartwell immediately turned to the police chief. Ray, we're just concerned about some of the customers Marcus here is choosing to serve. Yesterday, he did work for a Hell's Angel. We think the town should be concerned about that kind of element being made to feel welcome here. Chief Patterson looked at Marcus with a neutral expression. That true, Marcus? You worked on a motorcycle for a Hell's Angel? I worked on a motorcycle for a customer, Marcus replied. The bike had mechanical problems, and I fixed them. The man was polite and paid his bill. Any trouble? Any threats or intimidation? None at all. He was respectful the whole time. Chief Patterson nodded thoughtfully. Well, Jake, I can't see that there's any law against fixing someone's motorcycle. Long as there wasn't any trouble, and Marcus says there wasn't, then I don't see a problem. Bobby Hartwell looked frustrated. Come on, Ray. These aren't just regular people. Hell's Angels are involved in all kinds of illegal activities. Having them feel comfortable coming to town is asking for trouble. Maybe so, Chief Patterson said. But Marcus runs a legitimate business, and he has the right to serve whoever he chooses, long as they're not causing problems. If we start telling business owners who they can and can't serve based on what we think about their customers, that's a slippery slope. Jake Hartwell realized he wasn't getting the support he wanted from the police chief. Fine, but don't say we didn't warn you when this comes back to bite the whole town. The Hartwell brothers climbed back into their trucks and drove away, leaving Marcus alone with Chief Patterson. The police chief watched them go, then turned back to Marcus. They got a point about one thing, Chief Patterson said quietly. Hell's Angels do have a reputation. You sure there wasn't any trouble yesterday? Marcus shook his head. None at all. The man, his name was Frank Morrison, was as polite as any customer I've ever had. He paid his bill and thanked me for the work. That's it. Chief Patterson nodded. All right. But, Marcus, just be careful, okay? I'm not saying you did anything wrong, but sometimes getting involved with certain people can lead to complications you don't expect. I understand, Chief, but I'm not going to turn away paying customers just because someone else doesn't like who they associate with. After Chief Patterson left, Marcus went back inside the garage to start his day's work. But he was troubled by the conversation with the Hartwell brothers. He had lived in Millfield his entire life and had always felt accepted by the community. The idea that helping one customer could cause problems with others bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Around 10 o'clock, Tom Bradley arrived to drop off his pickup truck for the transmission service. Tom was a farmer who lived about 5 miles outside of town, and Marcus had known him since childhood. Tom's father and Marcus's father had been friends, and Tom had always been friendly and supportive of Marcus's business. But as Tom handed over his keys, Marcus could tell something was different. Tom seemed uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact and keeping the conversation short. Just needs the transmission fluid changed, Tom said. Should be ready by this afternoon, right? Sure thing, Tom. Shouldn't take more than a couple hours. Tom nodded and started to walk toward his wife's car, which was waiting to give him a ride home. Then he stopped and turned back to Marcus. Marcus, can I give you some advice? Of course. Tom looked around to make sure no one was listening, then stepped closer. I heard about yesterday. About the biker. Look, I don't have anything personal against you doing business with whoever you want. But there are people in town who are upset about it. And some of those people are customers of yours. Marcus felt his heart sink a little. Are you saying you don't want to do business with me anymore? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just telling you to be careful. There's talk around town. Some people are saying you're bringing the wrong element to Millfield. Others are defending you. It's causing divisions. Over a motorcycle repair? Tom sighed. You know how small towns are, Marcus. People get worked up about things. Maybe it'll blow over, maybe it won't. I just thought you should know what people are saying. After Tom left, Marcus tried to focus on his work, but he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his stomach. He had always prided himself on staying out of town politics and drama. He just wanted to run his business, do good work, and live his life quietly. The idea that a simple business transaction could cause this kind of controversy seemed ridiculous to him. Around noon, Marcus was working under the hood of the church van when he heard a car door slam outside. He looked up to see a black sedan parked in front of his garage. The car was expensive looking and clean, definitely not the kind of vehicle he usually worked on. A man in a business suit was walking toward the garage. Marcus didn't recognize the man, but he looked like he was from out of town. He was probably in his 50s, with carefully styled gray hair and an expensive watch. His suit was dark blue and perfectly tailored, and his shoes looked like they cost more than Marcus made in a week. Are you Marcus Johnson? The man asked. Yes, sir. Can I help you? The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. My name is Richard Blackwood. I'm a regional manager for AutoZone. I understand you had some interesting customers here yesterday. Marcus took the business card, but didn't look at it. He was getting tired of people wanting to talk about yesterday's motorcycle repair. I had a customer with a broken-down motorcycle. I fixed it. That's pretty much the whole story. Blackwood smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. Mr. Johnson, I think you're being a bit modest. Word has gotten around that you provided services to a member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. That's concerning to some people. Concerning how? Well, AutoZone has been considering opening a store here in Millfield. It would be good for the local economy, provide jobs, that sort of thing. But we need to be sure that the business environment is appropriate for our corporate image. Marcus was starting to understand where this conversation was going. And you think my customers affect that somehow? Let's just say that businesses sometimes have to make difficult decisions based on community standards. If certain elements are being welcomed and encouraged in the area, that might affect our decision about whether to invest here. Marcus felt anger building in his chest. Are you threatening me? Not at all. I'm simply explaining how business decisions are made. Corporate responsibility, community standards, that sort of thing. I'm sure you understand. What I understand is that you're trying to tell me who I can and can't serve in my own business. Blackwood's smile became even colder. I'm not telling you anything, Mr. Johnson. I'm just sharing information that might help you make informed decisions about your future business relationships. After Blackwood left, Marcus sat down on a folding chair and tried to process what had just happened. In the space of one morning, he had been confronted by angry local customers, warned by a friendly farmer, and essentially threatened by a corporate executive. All because he had done professional work for a paying customer. Marcus thought about his father, who had always taught him to judge people by their character rather than their appearance or reputation. His father had served customers of all kinds, rich and poor, black and white, local and out of town. He had never turned away business based on who people were or what others thought of them. But Marcus also thought about the practical realities of running a small business in a small town. He depended on local customers for his livelihood. If enough people decided to take their business elsewhere, he could lose everything his father had built. Around 3 o'clock, Marcus was finishing up the transmission work on Tom Bradley's truck when another customer arrived. It was Sarah Chun, a young woman who taught at the local elementary school. Sarah was originally from California, but had moved to Millfield 2 years earlier when she married David Chun, who worked at the bank. She was always friendly and polite, and Marcus had done several repairs on her Toyota. But, like Tom Bradley earlier, Sarah seemed uncomfortable as she dropped off her car for the brake work. "Hi, Marcus," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "I need the front brakes looked at. They've been squeaking for a few days." "No problem, Sarah. Should have it ready by tomorrow afternoon." Sarah nodded and started to leave, then stopped. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Sure. The person you helped yesterday, was he really a Hell's Angel?" Marcus sighed. "He was wearing their colors, if that's what you're asking. But he was just a customer with a broken motorcycle." Sarah looked worried. "Some of the other teachers at school are talking about it. They're concerned about, well, about safety, about what kind of people might start coming around town." "Sarah, I've been running this garage for 3 years. I've never had a single problem with violence or trouble from any customer. The man yesterday was polite and respectful. He paid his bill and left. That's it. I believe you, Marcus. But you have to understand how it looks to some people. Hell's Angels have a reputation. So do a lot of people. But I try to judge folks by how they behave when they're here, not by what I hear about them from other sources." Sarah nodded, but Marcus could tell she was still troubled. After she left, Marcus realized that his reputation in the community was being damaged by something that seemed completely unreasonable to him. He had simply done his job, the same job he did every day for every customer. But because this particular customer wore different clothes and belonged to an organization with a controversial reputation, suddenly, Marcus was being seen as someone who was bringing dangerous elements to town. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus noticed that the usual steady stream of customers seemed lighter than normal. Several people who had scheduled appointments called to cancel or reschedule. By 5 o'clock, when Marcus normally started thinking about closing up, he had only completed 2 of his scheduled jobs. Marcus was cleaning up his tools when his cell phone rang. The number wasn't familiar, but he answered anyway. "Johnson Auto Repair." "Marcus? This is Frank Morrison. Diesel. From yesterday." Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions at hearing Diesel's voice. Part of him was glad to hear from the man who had been such a good customer. But Another part of him worried about what new problems this might create. Hi, Frank. What can I do for you? I wanted to thank you again for the work yesterday. The bike's been running perfect. But I also wanted to let you know something. I heard there might be some folks in your town who weren't too happy about me being there. Marcus felt surprised. How did you hear that? Word gets around. We keep our ears open about things that might AF 3 days after the motorcycle repair that had turned Marcus Johnson's quiet life upside down. The real consequences began to show themselves. Friday morning started with Marcus arriving at his garage to find the word "Traitor" spray-painted across the front window in bright red letters. The vandalism had been done sometime during the night, and the paint was still slightly wet when Marcus discovered it at 7 in the morning. Marcus stood looking at the graffiti for several minutes, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. He had never done anything to hurt anyone in Millfield. All he had ever tried to do was run an honest business and treat people fairly. But now someone hated him enough to come to his property in the middle of the night and vandalize it. Chief Patterson arrived about 20 minutes after Marcus called the police department. The police chief took photos of the graffiti and asked Marcus if he had any idea who might have done it. Marcus didn't, though he suspected it was probably related to the controversy over the motorcycle repair. "This is getting out of hand," Chief Patterson said, looking at the red letters on the window. "I'll ask around, see if anyone saw anything. But you know how these things are. People don't usually do vandalism where there are witnesses." "Is this what I can expect now?" Marcus asked. "Someone coming by every night to mess with my property?" "I hope not. But, Marcus, I'm going to be straight with you. There are people in town who are really worked up about this Hells Angels thing. Most folks understand that you were just doing your job, but there's a vocal minority that sees it differently." Marcus spent the morning cleaning the paint off his window. It took nearly 2 hours and a lot of solvent to get it completely removed. While he worked, several people drove by and stared, but nobody stopped to help or even to ask if he was okay. Around 11 o'clock, Marcus received a phone call that made his stomach drop. It was Janet Morrison, the office manager for Millfield Motors, the largest auto dealership in town. Marcus had done subcontract work for the dealership for 2 years, handling repairs on cars that they didn't have time or space to work on in their own service department. It was good, steady business that accounted for about 30% of Marcus's monthly income. "Marcus, this is Janet at Millfield Motors. Mr. Brennan wants to see you in his office this afternoon. Can you come by around 2 o'clock? "Sure, Janet. What's this about?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "He wants to discuss your subcontract arrangement with us." Marcus knew this couldn't be good news. People didn't call meetings to discuss contract arrangements unless there was a problem. But he agreed to the meeting and spent the rest of the morning dreading what was coming. At 2 o'clock sharp, Marcus walked into the offices of Millfield Motors. The dealership was the biggest business in town, selling both new and used cars and employing nearly 40 people. Marcus had always felt proud to be associated with them, even in a small way. Bill Brennan, the owner of the dealership, was waiting in his office. Brennan was a successful businessman in his 60s who had built Millfield Motors from nothing over the past 30 years. He was respected in the community and served on the city council and the Chamber of Commerce. Marcus had always found him to be fair and straightforward in their business dealings. But today, Brennan looked uncomfortable as Marcus sat down across from his desk. "Marcus, I'll get straight to the point," Brennan said. "We're going to have to terminate our subcontracting arrangement." Marcus felt like he had been punched in the stomach, but he kept his voice steady. "Can I ask why?" Brennan sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Look, this isn't personal, Marcus. You do good work, and you've always been reliable. But I've had several customers this week express concern about our association with you." "Association? We have a business relationship. I do overflow work for you when your service department is busy. I know that, and you know that. But perception matters in business, Marcus. When customers see your name on our preferred contractor list, some of them are making connections they don't like." Marcus tried to stay calm, but anger was building inside him. "What connections?" "Word has gotten around about the motorcycle repair you did. Some people see that as you supporting Hells Angels, and they don't want to do business with companies that support you. I fixed a broken motorcycle for a paying customer. That's not supporting anyone. That's just being a mechanic." Brennan nodded. "I understand that. But In business, sometimes perception is more important than reality. I've got to think about my employees and their families. If I lose customers over this, it affects everyone who works here. Marcus stood up from his chair. So you're firing me because I did honest work for someone you don't approve of. I'm terminating a business relationship because it's no longer in my company's best interests. It's nothing personal. It feels pretty personal to me. Marcus left the dealership feeling like his world was crumbling around him. The subcontract work from Millfield Motors had been a significant part of his income. Losing it would make it much harder to pay his bills and keep the garage running. But, more than the financial impact, the rejection from Bill Brennan hurt on a deeper level. It felt like the community he had grown up in was turning its back on him. The weekend brought no relief from the pressure. On Saturday morning, Marcus discovered that someone had slashed 2 of his tires during the night. Again, there were no witnesses, and Chief Patterson could only take a report and promised to increase patrols around the garage. Sunday morning, Marcus decided to attend services at First Baptist Church, where he had gone with his family since childhood. He rarely missed Sunday services, and he wasn't going to let the current situation change that routine. But, as he walked into the sanctuary, he could feel eyes on him from all directions. The pastor, Reverend William Hayes, was a good man who had always preached about tolerance and understanding. But even he seemed uncomfortable when he shook Marcus's hand at the door. The conversation was brief and awkward, without the warmth that had always characterized their interactions. During the service, Marcus sat in his usual pew about halfway up on the right side of the church. He tried to focus on the sermon, which was about forgiveness and understanding others. But he was acutely aware of the whispered conversations and sideways glances from other members of the congregation. After the service, instead of the usual friendly conversations in the fellowship hall, Marcus found himself largely ignored. A few people spoke to him, but their greetings were polite and brief. Most people seemed to find reasons to look the other way or suddenly become involved in conversations with other people. The exception was Mrs. Patterson, his former third-grade teacher, who made a point of seeking him out. "Marcus Johnson," she said in her firm teacher's voice, "I want you to know that some of us still have sense in this town. You did nothing wrong by fixing that man's motorcycle." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That means a lot. Your father would be proud of you for standing up for your principles. Don't let these fools make you compromise who you are." Monday morning brought more bad news. Marcus arrived at the garage to find a letter that had been slipped under his door during the night. It was from his landlord, Pete Morrison, who owned the building that housed Johnson Auto Repair. The letter was brief and formal. Due to complaints from other tenants and concerns about the type of clientele being attracted to the property, I am giving you 30 days' notice to vacate the premises. Marcus stared at the letter in disbelief. He had rented the building from Pete Morrison for 3 years and had never been late with rent or caused any problems. The other tenants were the hardware store next door and a small insurance office. Marcus couldn't imagine either of them complaining about his business. But, as Marcus thought about it, he realized what was really happening. Pete Morrison was Jake Hartwell's brother-in-law. The pressure to get rid of Marcus was coming from the same people who had confronted him about the motorcycle repair. Around 10 o'clock, Marcus received a call from his insurance agent, Larry Stevens. Larry had been the Johnson family's insurance agent for over 15 years and had always been friendly and helpful. "Marcus, I need to talk to you about your liability coverage," Larry said. "There's been some discussion about your policy." "What kind of discussion?" "Well, some people have raised concerns about the risk profile of your business, given recent events." Marcus felt his temper rising. "Larry, are you canceling my insurance?" "Not canceling, no. But the company is requiring additional premium payments to account for increased risk factors." "How much additional?" "Triple your current premium." Marcus did the math in his head. His insurance costs would go from $300 a month to $900. Combined with the loss of income from Millfield Motors and the potential loss of his building, the increased insurance cost would make it impossible to keep the business running. "Larry, you've been insuring my business for 3 years. Have I ever filed a claim? Have I ever had any problems with violence or liability issues?" "No, Marcus, you haven't. But insurance is about assessing risk, and right now, the company sees your business as higher risk than before." "Based on what?" "One customer who paid his bill, and left without causing any trouble, based on the potential for future problems. Look, Marcus, I'm sorry. This isn't personal. It's just business. Marcus hung up the phone and sat in the quiet garage, trying to process what was happening to his life. In less than a week, he had been vandalized twice, lost a major source of income, been given notice to vacate his building, and seen his insurance costs triple. All because he had done professional work for a customer who happened to belong to an organization that some people didn't like. That afternoon, Marcus was working on a brake job for one of his remaining loyal customers when he heard motorcycles approaching. He looked up to see 3 Harley-Davidson motorcycles pulling into his parking lot. The lead bike was the same Black Road King that Diesel had been riding the previous week. Marcus felt his heart rate increase as the 3 bikers dismounted and removed their helmets. All 3 were large men wearing Hells Angels colors, and Marcus recognized Diesel among them. The other 2 were strangers, but they looked just as intimidating as Diesel had when Marcus first met him. Diesel walked toward the garage with the other 2 men flanking him. Marcus wiped his hands on his coveralls and stepped out to meet them, trying to project more confidence than he felt. "Hello, Frank," Marcus said. "Marcus," Diesel replied with a nod. "I heard you've been having some problems since I was here last week." "Word travels fast." "It does. These are my brothers, Tommy and Bear. We wanted to come by and check on you." The man introduced as Tommy was probably in his 30s, with long brown hair and a full beard. Bear was older, maybe 50, with graying hair and arms covered in military tattoos. Both men looked at Marcus with expressions that seemed friendly but alert. "I appreciate the concern," Marcus said, "but I don't want to cause you any trouble, and I don't want you to feel responsible for my problems." Diesel shook his head. "Brother, you stood up for what was right when you could have taken the easy way out. That means something to us. We take care of people who treat us with respect." "The thing is," Marcus said carefully, "your being here is probably making my situation worse. People see Hells Angels at my garage, and it confirms what they already think." Bear spoke for the first time, his voice deep and gravelly. "So you want us to leave?" Marcus thought about it for a moment. He was already facing the loss of his business and his reputation in the community. Having 3 Hells Angels in his parking lot couldn't make things much worse than they already were. "No," Marcus said finally. "I'm not going to ask you to leave. You're not doing anything wrong by being here." Diesel smiled. "Good, because we've got a proposition for you." "What kind of proposition?" "Our club has bikes that need maintenance and repair work." "Good. Honest mechanics who we can trust are hard to find. We'd like to bring our business to you on a regular basis." Marcus considered this carefully. The Hells Angels were offering him exactly what he was losing from his regular customers: steady business and reliable income. But accepting their offer would certainly make his situation in Millfield worse. "How much business are we talking about?" Marcus asked. Tommy answered this time. "We've got 43 members in this chapter alone. Most of us have at least 1 bike. Some have 2 or 3. Plus we've got friends in other chapters who might start coming here if word gets out that you do good work." Bear nodded. "Could be 50, 60 bikes a month that need various kinds of work. Oil changes, tune-ups, major repairs, custom modifications. The kind of steady income that could support a business." Marcus looked at the 3 men standing in his garage. A week ago, he would never have imagined being in this situation. Now he was facing a choice between losing his business entirely or transforming it into something completely different. The morning that changed everything began with Marcus Johnson waking up unemployed for the first time in his adult life. It had been exactly 10 days since he had been forced to close Johnson Auto Repair after losing his building lease, his insurance coverage, and most of his customers. The garage that his father had built and that Marcus had proudly operated for 3 years was now empty, with all of his tools and equipment stored in a rented storage unit on the outskirts of town. Marcus sat on the edge of his bed in his small apartment, looking at the business card that Diesel had given him 2 weeks earlier. The card was worn now from being handled so many times as Marcus wrestled with his decision. On one side was just a name and phone number. On the other side was a choice that would determine the direction of his entire life. Over the past week, Marcus had applied for jobs at every auto repair shop within 50 miles of Millfield. The responses had been polite, but firm rejections. Word had traveled throughout the automotive community about the biker mechanic who had caused trouble in Millfield. No one wanted to risk their own reputation by hiring someone with Marcus's newfound notoriety. Marcus had also considered leaving Alabama entirely, starting over somewhere else where no one knew about the motorcycle repair that had turned his life upside down. But leaving felt like admitting defeat, like allowing the narrow-minded elements in his community to drive him away from the only home he had ever known. At 10 o'clock that morning, Marcus made the phone call that would change his life forever. "This is Frank." Diesel's gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "Frank, this is Marcus Johnson. I've been thinking about your proposition, and I'm interested, but I need to know exactly what I'd be getting into." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Where are you right now?" "At my apartment in Millfield." "Pack a bag. I'm sending someone to pick you up. We're going to Birmingham for a few days so you can see what we're really about." 2 hours later, Marcus was sitting in the passenger seat of a pickup truck driving toward Birmingham, Alabama. The driver was Tommy, one of the Hells Angels he had met at his garage the week before. Tommy turned out to be more talkative than Marcus had expected, and during the 2-hour drive, Marcus learned more about the Hells Angels than he had ever known. "Most people think we're all criminals and outlaws," Tommy said as they drove through the rolling hills of central Alabama. "And I'm not going to lie to you. Some of our members have had trouble with the law. But most of us are just working guys who love motorcycles and value brotherhood and loyalty." "What do you do for work?" Marcus asked. "I'm a carpenter. Been building houses for 15 years. Bear, who you met the other day, he's a retired Marine who works as a security guard. Diesel owns a small trucking company. We've got members who are mechanics, electricians, truck drivers, construction workers. Regular guys. What about the reputation, the violence, and drug dealing?" Tommy was quiet for a moment. "Look, Marcus, I'm not going to tell you that everything you've heard is wrong. This is a tough organization, and sometimes we have to deal with tough situations. But most of what people think they know about us comes from movies and TV shows, not reality." When they arrived in Birmingham, Tommy drove to a large warehouse in an industrial area on the south side of the city. The building looked like any other warehouse from the outside, but as they pulled around to the back, Marcus could see dozens of motorcycles parked in neat rows. The sound of engines and power tools echoed from inside the building. Inside the warehouse, Marcus found himself in what looked like the most well-equipped motorcycle repair facility he had ever seen. There were professional lifts, complete sets of tools, parts storage areas, and work bays that would have been impressive in any commercial garage. About 20 men were working on various motorcycles, and the level of organization and professionalism surprised Marcus. Diesel appeared from one of the work bays, wiping his hands on a rag. "Marcus, welcome to our clubhouse. What do you think?" Marcus looked around at the facility. "This is impressive. How long have you had this setup?" "About 5 years. We got tired of paying dealer prices for maintenance and repairs, so we decided to do it ourselves. Problem is, we're better at riding bikes than fixing them. We need someone who really knows what they're doing." For the next 3 hours, Diesel and Tommy showed Marcus around the facility and introduced him to other members of the club. Marcus met accountants, veterans, small business owners, and working-class guys who defied every stereotype he had heard about motorcycle clubs. They were polite, respectful, and genuinely interested in his expertise with engines and mechanical systems. The most surprising person Marcus met was a man named Professor, who turned out to be a retired engineering instructor from the University of Alabama. Professor was in his 60s, with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, and he looked more like someone's grandfather than a Hells Angel. "I joined the club after my wife died," Professor explained as he showed Marcus some of the more sophisticated diagnostic equipment. "I was lonely and needed something to focus on. These guys became my family." "But why the Hells Angels specifically?" Marcus asked. "Why not just a regular motorcycle club?" Professor smiled. "Because regular motorcycle clubs don't understand what brotherhood really means. When you become a Hells Angel, you're making a commitment that goes beyond just riding motorcycles together. These men would risk their lives for each other, and for people they consider part of their extended family." That evening, Marcus joined the club members for dinner at a barbecue restaurant near the warehouse. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly, with conversations about everything from football to family problems to motorcycle modifications. Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying the company and the conversation. But the evening also included discussions that reminded Marcus that this was not just a social club. There were careful conversations about territory, respect, and dealing with challenges from other motorcycle clubs. Marcus began to understand that the Hells Angels operated in a world with its own rules and codes, some of which existed outside the boundaries of conventional society. The thing you need to understand, Diesel explained as they sat at a picnic table outside the restaurant, is that we take care of our own. But we also expect loyalty and discretion. If you become part of our world, even as a business partner, there are certain things you'll see and hear that can't be shared with outsiders. What kind of things? Nothing illegal, necessarily, but private things, personal things, family business that stays in the family. Marcus spent 2 more days in Birmingham, learning about the club's structure, meeting members from other chapters, and getting a better understanding of what his role would be if he accepted their offer. The Hells Angels were offering him not just work, but a completely different way of life. The business proposition was attractive. Marcus would be provided with a fully equipped garage facility, a steady stream of customers, and the resources to build a successful business. In return, he would provide exclusive service to club members and maintain absolute confidentiality about their activities. But Marcus also learned that accepting the offer would mean more than just changing jobs. It would mean becoming part of a brotherhood that had its own codes of conduct, its own way of handling disputes, and its own definition of loyalty. It wasn't just about fixing motorcycles. It was about becoming part of a family that operated outside the mainstream of American society. On his last night in Birmingham, Marcus sat in his hotel room and called his Aunt Sarah, his father's sister who lived in Mobile. Sarah was the only family Marcus had left, and she was one of the few people whose opinion he truly valued. "Marcus, honey, you sound troubled," Sarah said after they had talked for a few minutes. "I am troubled, Aunt Sarah. I'm trying to make a decision that's going to affect the rest of my life, and I don't know what Dad would want me to do." Marcus explained the situation to his aunt, including the controversy in Millfield, the loss of his business, and the offer from the Hells Angels. Sarah listened without interrupting, asking occasional questions for clarification. When Marcus finished his story, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Marcus," she finally said, "your father always taught you to judge people by their actions, not by what other people said about them. From what you're telling me, these motorcycle club people have treated you with respect and offered you an opportunity when your own community turned its back on you. But they're Hells Angels, Aunt Sarah. They have a reputation. So do you now. The question is whether you're going to let other people's fears and prejudices determine how you live your life. What if I'm making a mistake? What if I get involved with something I shouldn't?" Sarah sighed. "Honey, life is full of risks. The biggest risk is usually not taking any risks at all. Your father took a risk when he started that garage. He took a risk every time he treated people fairly when other folks thought he should discriminate. Some of those risks paid off, some of them didn't. But he never stopped being true to who he was." The next morning, Marcus called Diesel and accepted the offer. 2 weeks later, Marcus Johnson was standing in a new garage facility in a warehouse district on the outskirts of Birmingham. The sign outside read, "Brotherhood Automotive, Professional Motorcycle Service." The Hells Angels had provided him with everything he needed to start over: tools, equipment, a building, and, most importantly, customers who valued his work and treated him with respect. The transformation of Marcus's life was dramatic and immediate. Instead of struggling to pay bills and worrying about vandalism, he found himself running a successful business with more work than he could handle. The Hells Angels kept their word about bringing him steady business, and word spread quickly throughout the motorcycle community about the quality of his work. But the changes went beyond just business success. Marcus found himself becoming part of a community that valued loyalty, honesty, and standing up for what was right. The Hells Angels operated by codes that were different from mainstream society, but, in many ways, they were codes that Marcus could respect and understand. Marcus learned that the club had an extensive charity operation, organizing rides to raise money for children's hospitals, veterans organizations, and disaster relief efforts. He met Hell's Angels who were devoted fathers, successful businessmen, and community volunteers. He also met members who had criminal records and who lived on the margins of society. But even these men were bound by codes of honor that demanded they protect the innocent and stand up for those who couldn't protect themselves. The most surprising aspect of his new life was the sense of belonging he felt. In Millfield, Marcus had always been somewhat isolated, running his business alone and keeping mostly to himself. In the Hells Angels community, he found himself surrounded by men who considered him family and who would go to great lengths to support and protect him. 6 months after leaving Millfield, Marcus received a phone call that would test his new loyalties and force him to confront the consequences of his decision to join the motorcycle world. It was Chief Patterson from the Millfield Police Department. "Marcus, I hope you're doing well," Chief Patterson said. "I'm calling because we have a situation here, and, frankly, we could use your help." "What kind of situation, Chief?" "There's been a series of break-ins targeting elderly residents in town. The perpetrator seems to be specifically targeting people who live alone and who might be vulnerable. We think it might be someone who knows the community well enough to identify the best targets." Marcus felt confused about why Chief Patterson was calling him about this. "I'm sorry to hear that, Chief, but I don't understand what this has to do with me. I've been living in Birmingham for months. The thing is, Marcus, we think the person responsible might be connected to some of the people who gave you trouble when you were here. We also think that your new associates might have information that could help us solve these crimes." Marcus realized that Chief Patterson was asking him to use his connections with the Hells Angels to help with a police investigation. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same police department that had been unable to stop the harassment and vandalism that drove him out of town was now asking for his help. "Chief, I'm not sure what you think I can do." "Marcus, I know these motorcycle club people have their own networks and ways of getting information. If someone in our area is preying on elderly folks, they might know something about it, and they might be willing to share that information with you." 1 year after Marcus Johnson left Millfield in disgrace, he returned as something no one in the small Alabama town could have imagined, a hero. But the circumstances of his return and the events that preceded it would forever change how the people of Millfield understood courage, prejudice, and what it really means to judge someone by their character. It was a Tuesday evening in September when Marcus received the phone call that would bring him home. He was in his garage in Birmingham, working late on a custom paint job for one of the club members, when his cell phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made him answer it. "Is this Marcus Johnson?" The voice was young and frightened. "Yes, this is Marcus." "Who is this?" "My name is Katie Patterson. I'm Chief Patterson's daughter. I need your help." Marcus recognized the name. Katie Patterson was a college student at Auburn University, about 90 miles southeast of Millfield. She was Chief Patterson's youngest daughter, and Marcus remembered her as a quiet, studious girl who had been a few years behind him in school. "Katie, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm in trouble, Mr. Johnson. Real trouble. And I don't know who else to call." Katie's story came out in frightened, fragmented pieces. She had been driving home from Auburn to Millfield for a weekend visit when her car broke down on a rural stretch of highway about 30 miles from home. It was getting dark, and her cell phone had died. She had walked to what looked like the only building in the area, a rundown bar and garage that catered to truckers and travelers. When Katie asked to use their phone to call for help, the owner of the establishment, a man named Ricky Caulfield, had offered to fix her car. But instead of helping her, Caulfield had disabled her vehicle further and was essentially holding her hostage. He had made it clear that he expected payment for his services that had nothing to do with money. "He's got 2 other guys here with him," Katie whispered into the phone. "They've been drinking, and they keep saying things. Mr. Johnson, I'm scared they're going to hurt me." "Where are you exactly, Katie?" "It's called Caulfield's Garage. It's on Highway 78, maybe 30 miles south of Millfield. There's a big sign for truckers." Marcus knew the place. Caulfield's Garage had a reputation as a rough establishment that catered to the worst elements of the trucker community. It was the kind of place where decent people didn't stop, especially not young women traveling alone. "Katie, have you called your father?" "I tried, but his phone goes straight to voicemail. I think he's in Montgomery for a police conference." "I tried calling 911. But they said it could be an hour or more before anyone could get here, and I don't think I have an hour. These guys are getting more aggressive. Marcus felt his blood run cold. Katie Patterson was in serious danger, and it sounded like help from official sources wasn't going to arrive in time. He looked at his watch. It was almost 9 o'clock at night, and Caulfield's garage was over an hour's drive from Birmingham. Katie, listen to me carefully. I'm going to come get you, but I need you to stay calm and stay safe until I get there. Find a place to lock yourself in if you can, a bathroom, an office, anywhere with a solid door. And keep this phone line open. Mr. Johnson, there's no one else here except these 3 men. I don't think I can. Yes, you can, Katie. You're Chief Patterson's daughter, which means you're tougher than you know. Just hold on. Help is coming. Marcus hung up and immediately called Diesel. Within minutes, he had explained the situation to his Hells Angels brothers. Their response was immediate and unanimous. We ride, Diesel said simply. Nobody messes with kids, especially not good kids whose families have treated us fairly. 20 minutes later, a convoy of 8 Hells Angels motorcycles was roaring through the Alabama night toward Caulfield's garage. Marcus rode behind Diesel on his own Harley, a bike the club had helped him buy and customize. The other riders included Bear, Tommy, Professor, and 4 other members whose reputations for dealing with predators and bullies were well established in the motorcycle community. As they rode through the darkness, Marcus thought about the irony of the situation. A year ago, the people of Millfield had driven him out of town because they feared that associating with Hells Angels would bring danger to their community. Now those same Hells Angels were racing through the night to save one of Millfield's daughters from real predators. They reached Caulfield's garage at 10:30 p.m. The establishment was exactly as Katie had described it, a rundown building with a few trucks parked outside and neon beer signs glowing in the windows. Marcus could see Katie's small Honda Civic in the parking lot with its hood up. The Hells Angels parked their motorcycles in a line in front of the building and dismounted. The sound of 8 Harley-Davidson engines arriving at once was unmistakable, and Marcus could see faces appearing at the windows of the bar. Diesel walked toward the front door with Marcus and the other club members flanking him. Before they could reach the entrance, the door opened, and 3 men stepped outside. Marcus recognized Ricky Caulfield from his reputation, a big man in his 40s with greasy hair and the kind of mean look that came from years of intimidating people weaker than himself. You boys lost? Caulfield asked, trying to sound confident, but failing to hide the nervousness in his voice. We're looking for a young lady, Diesel replied calmly. Katie Patterson. We understand she's having some car trouble. Don't know what you're talking about. Bear stepped forward, his military bearing evident in every movement. Son, we know she's here. We know her car broke down. And we know you've been making her uncomfortable. Now, you can handle this the easy way or the hard way. But that girl is leaving with us tonight. One of Caulfield's companions, clearly drunk and apparently unaware of how dangerous the situation was becoming, decided to mouth off. What makes you think you can come in here and tell us what to do? This is our place. Professor, the retired engineering instructor, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and spoke in the calm, measured tone he had once used to lecture unruly students. Young man, you have approximately 30 seconds to produce Miss Patterson, unharmed and unmolested. If you choose not to do so, my associates here are going to become extremely disappointed in your decision-making abilities. The threat was delivered so politely and academically that it took a moment for its full meaning to sink in. But the sight of 8 large men in hell, Marcus felt torn between his loyalty to his new community and his desire to help the vulnerable people being targeted in his hometown. He told Chief Patterson that he would think about it and call him back. That evening, Marcus brought the situation to Diesel and several other senior members of the club. Their response surprised him. Of course we'll help, Diesel said immediately. Preying on old folks is the kind of thing we don't tolerate. Anyone who would break into an elderly person's home and steal from them or hurt them is a coward and a predator. Bear nodded in agreement. We'll put the word out through our network. If someone's doing this kind of thing in that area, we'll find out who it is. Marcus called Chief Patterson back and agreed to serve as a liaison between the police and the Hells Angels in investigating the break-ins. It was an unusual arrangement, but it represented something remarkable. cooperation between two groups that were usually on opposite sides of the law. Within a week, the Hells Angels network had identified the perpetrator. It turned out to be Jake Hartwell, one of the men who had originally confronted Marcus about the motorcycle repair. Hartwell had been struggling financially and had turned to targeting elderly residents who he knew would be unlikely to fight back or pursue prosecution vigorously. The Hells Angels provided the police with detailed information about Hartwell's activities, including times, locations, and evidence that led to his arrest and conviction. The cooperation between the motorcycle club and law enforcement was so successful that it led to ongoing informal partnerships in addressing other crimes that affected vulnerable community members. Marcus realized that his decision to leave Millfield and join the Hells Angels community had led to an outcome that no one could have predicted. The man who had been driven out of town for helping a biker had become instrumental in solving crimes and protecting the very people who had rejected him. But the biggest revelation was yet to come, and it would change not just Marcus's understanding of his situation, but the entire town's perception of who the real heroes and villains were in this story. "I need to think about this," Marcus said. "Fair enough," Diesel replied. "But don't think too long. Word is you might not have this place much longer." After the bikers left, Marcus sat in his garage as the sun set and tried to figure out what to do next. Every principle his father had taught him said that he should treat all customers equally and judge people by their actions rather than their reputations. But the practical reality was that standing by those principles was costing him everything he had worked for. Marcus realized that he was at a crossroads that would define not just his business, but who he was as a person. He could give in to the pressure from the community and find a way to distance himself from the Hells Angels. Or he could continue to stand by his principles, even if it meant completely changing his life. As he locked up the garage that night, Marcus knew that whatever decision he made would have consequences he couldn't foresee. But he also knew that he was about to discover what he was really made of. "Affect our people. I just wanted you to know that I appreciate what you did, and I'm sorry if it's causing you problems. It's not your fault, Frank. Some people just have strong opinions about things they don't understand. Maybe so. But I also wanted you to know that if anyone gives you serious trouble over this, you call me. I meant what I said yesterday about you being able to count on me." After hanging up, Marcus sat in the quiet garage and thought about how complicated his simple life had become in just 24 hours. Yesterday morning, he had been just another small-town mechanic with a solid reputation and a steady business. Now he was caught in the middle of a controversy he had never asked for and didn't fully understand. Marcus locked up the garage and drove home, but his mind kept churning over the day's events. He wondered if he had made a mistake by working on Diesel's motorcycle. Not because there was anything wrong with the work itself, but because of the consequences it was having for his business and his standing in the community. But as he thought about his father's teachings and his own principles, Marcus realized that he couldn't regret doing honest work for a paying customer, regardless of what other people thought about it. The question was whether he would be able to maintain those principles if the pressure from the community continued to increase. Marcus had no way of knowing that the pressure was about to get much worse, and that his decision to stand by his principles would cost him more than he had ever imagined possible. "Olive," he looked at Marcus seriously. "You ever need anything, you call me," Diesel said, handing Marcus a business card. It was simple, with just a name, Frank Morrison, and a phone number. "I mean it. You treated me fair and did honest work. That means something." Marcus took the card and nodded. "Drive safe." Diesel rode off into the night, the sound of his Harley echoing through the quiet streets of Millfield. Marcus watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner, then went back into the garage to clean up his tools and lock up for the night. As he drove home to his small apartment above the hardware store, Marcus thought about the evening's events. He had expected to have a quiet night working on routine repairs, but instead he had met one of the most interesting customers he had ever had. Diesel had been polite, respectful, and genuinely appreciative of good work. It made Marcus wonder about all the assumptions people made about others based on their appearance. Marcus had no way of knowing that this simple motorcycle repair would change his life in ways he could never imagine. All he knew was that he had done honest work for a fair price, and that felt good. It was the same principle his father had taught him, and it had served him well so far. But in a small town like Millfield, word traveled fast, and not everyone was going to be as understanding as Mrs. Patterson about Marcus's choice to help a Hell's Angel.